And now in tonight's roundtable, Maura Carlin explores bipartisan understanding with Better Angels.
Welcome to the Roundtable. I'm Maura Carlin. We're a few days before the midterm elections and just weeks before the holiday season, and many of us are wondering, how are we going to survive visits with family or friends across the political divide, or the other side of the political aisle? The United States remains quite polarized, reds against blues, conservatives versus progressives. One group is trying to bring people together, not necessarily to change their views, but to talk, to listen and respect, and it's called Better Angels. Our guests are two volunteers who organized a workshop last weekend in White Plains, Sara and Ken Freeman, and I'll let you figure out where each of them stand. But for full disclosure, about a year and a half ago, Sara and I put together a small Better Angels workshop in White Plains. My role, besides organizing, at the event I was maybe appropriately the reporter or the recorder of the events and the discussion of the participants, but I was not an actual participant. Now remember, you can participate in this discussion. Call, email, comment. The contact information's on your screen. So Sara and Ken, let me turn to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And let's start with, just tell us what Better Angels really is.
Better Angels is a ground-up citizens movement, bipartisan citizens movement that started soon after the 2016 national election. And its goal is to unify this country in these deeply polarizing times. And it does this through a series of scripted, moderated events, like workshops where we bring together an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And there are some ground rules where people are encouraged to listen respectfully and speak respectfully. But the one thing we do not do is we do not expect anyone to change their political ideology. We hope to enlarge their understandings of who the other is through building, a common ground. And that's
so Ken, if you're not trying to change minds, what is unification?
Okay. Unification is really, it's a process. In these workshops, by having each side listen to the other, and there's a carefully developed protocol for how we do this. The groups each get to know the other as individuals, as people, not just as somebody screaming on a cable news channel or whatever. People talk about, they go through a process where you come to understand what is their background, what has guided or informed their points of view. So you get a chance to know people. It's sort of interesting. I was reading an article the other day. Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, who may become the next Speaker again, her daughter is a journalist for CNN, Alexandra Pelosi, and she said, it's tough to hate people up close. Mm-hmm. And so we try to get people to interact as people, and hopefully in doing that, to find some common ground. Because the real end goal of all this is, how do we get red-blue alliances to work together? Because somehow we people, ordinary citizens, need to let the political class understand that we don't want all this divisiveness. We want people working together to develop solutions to problems.
So can you describe what happens at a workshop?
Well, the most recent workshop that we helped to organize was last Saturday. And after Ken and I spent many months recruiting, which is quite a challenge.
I know.
We were very fortunate in having total parity, equal number of Republicans and an equal number of Democrats. And the moderators, as Ken said, are skilled and they are trained in facilitation. And the protocol that is used is very scripted. So there's a choreography around what happens in the workshop. People first get to introduce themselves, explain why they're there. Then they move into 2 groups where they talk about stereotypes about themselves that the other has, and the kernel of truth that there might be to that stereotype. Following that, they come together again and they do what's called a fishbowl exercise, which is a group dynamic exercise where one group sits in the center and responds to certain questions while the other group, all they do on the outer circle is to listen. And then the process is reversed. And then there's a wrap-up. So our goal is
So there's not a conclusion?
The conclusion is that they do have concluding statements that they make at the end in terms of what were their takeaways, what did they learn. And that is often very insightful because, as Ken said, when you are face-to-face, you really humanize the other. You know, and in this day of social media where people fire off one thing or the other in an environment where you don't even care to know, much less see who you are saying this to, this becomes, you know, an event where we are all Americans. And I think that is the bottom line here. Red, blue, and purple, as we refer to ourselves. We are all Americans. Yeah.
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned the purple. Is it harder to get one side red or blue, or does even if it's not, do you end up with people who tend to be a little closer to the purple?
I think that likely varies by geography. So we can talk to what we see in the Northeast, okay? And we live in an area that tends to be more liberal. As a result, it is tougher to recruit Reds. Reds tend to be fearful, feeling they're going to be verbally attacked once they're in this kind of session. Frankly, we also hear the dynamic of one group or the other saying, why would I want to be in a room with these people? So it's a little bit of a self-selecting process. We need to recruit people who are willing to come together and do all this. You know, I would also build on what Sara was saying before, that in terms of the process, the workshop process, by having the groups think about what are the big stereotypes you think others have about you and what's not right about it and what are the kernels of truth, you get a degree of introspection that people don't typically have when they're watching their favorite or reading their favorite news source. So it really does get people thinking about how are they perceived,
And how they perceive
and
others.
how they perceive others, what's behind them, and probably gets people a little bit thinking about, you know, there are reasons why they see us this way. So, you know, but I think that in this geography, you're going to get people, let's say, certainly on the red side, closer to the middle, whereas my guess is in other parts of the country, you may see the spectrum move from left to right as opposed to here from right to left.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will finish our discussion about Better Angels, or continue it.
Do you know how to request our services? Just go to lmctv.org. Under the service banner, click Forms. In our Forms section, you can apply to be a volunteer, learn about membership, learn about corporate underwriting, request a bulletin board, coverage, DVD dubs, equipment, and PSAs.
It's all a click away at lmctv.org.
Welcome back to the Roundtable. We're talking with 2 volunteer organizers from Better Angels about partisanship, bipartisanship, tribalism, and pulling people together. So I want to take it to current events. In the last, let's say, week and a half, we've seen the murder of 2 blacks in Kentucky, initially attempted at a church, a rash of mailed bombs to left side persona, and a shooting rampage at a temple. How would these issues be discussed or handled at a Better Angels workshop?
What I think it would be fodder, very good fodder for a next generation Better Angels event, in the sense that I'm not so sure that a pilot workshop would approach this because it is so intense, but a second workshop, which is precisely what those who experienced our workshop last week want to do going forward, would dig deeper into specific issues. So we form what are called political alliances, where voluntarily members who have experienced the first round workshop say, I would love to really have more substantive conversations with the person on the other side around certain issues that are riling this nation. So, and we're seeing the genesis of some of this, because in the last 1 week since our workshop, there's at least a core of 4 or 5 people, equal numbers on the Democratic and the Republican side, that precisely want to do this. So these are called political alliances, where you dig deeper with a person from the other side and try to understand his or her point of view. You don't walk away saying, I don't believe you, but you walk away saying, I don't agree with you, but I can see why you feel that way.
And are those moderated also?
I'm not so sure.
Those, I mean, at this point, we don't expect those to be moderated. These are people that are quite knowledgeable on both sides, and I think can probably do a pretty good job of self-moderation. I think, you know, with the moderation that did go on in the protocol, it was tightly enough crafted that they certainly didn't invite or expect a lot of discussion about those events. And in fact, I would hope that everybody on both sides has enough humanity that we would all look with horror at all three events.
Let me ask you, given that you did this event and you know to some extent the people, do you think that they looked at it that way? Because I don't know whether nationally it's looked upon that way.
I would say because people who come to a Better Angels workshop tend to be self-selected and have an interest to start with, I would say that just about everybody in our workshop would have looked upon these events with horror.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's interesting. The Blues would acknowledge, look, there are extremists on the left. There's a group called Antifa. The extremists on the right would say, look, there are hateful people, there are alt-right or neo-Nazi or this or that, but my God, those are fringes, and I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to influence those fringes, but the vast majority of the people are far more reasonable. If, regardless of what side you're on, people's goals and objectives in life are really common. They are shared. People want opportunity, economic opportunity, education for their children, quality health care, etc. People care about others who are less fortunate. The differences tend to be strategic ones. How do you achieve those things? And I think that even further discussion in Better Angels would talk more about the issues of how do you achieve those things, as opposed to dwelling on the extremes that, frankly, not sure any of us really understand.
Well, were there issues that came across that people did agree on or want to work together on? As I recall from the workshop we organized, there were people that agreed on certain things that were important to them. You know, from both sides, they said, you know what, we could work on this, or at least they were having a discussion towards something. Did anything come out like that this time?
I'm not so sure it was largely represented, but I do remember listening to folks on the red side who said that they were troubled by some of the national policies of this administration that left those with real need without a safety net. So now there is now a commonality. There are Reds who feel that there has to be a just way, a fair way, that the American democratic ideal, regardless of which party you belong to, addresses the needs of everybody. So that I think that answers your question in terms of, Well, we're
going to take another quick break. Actually, it's not so quick. We have some video about Better Angels. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the next steps to fight polarization. Stay with us.
Better Angels is a national grassroots citizens movement dedicated to 3 principles. Number 1, the rancor, the divisiveness, the hatred of others who disagree with you, the hyperpartisanship is a trend that has gone way too far in this country, and we need to put a stop to it right now. The second one is that despite our disagreements, our robust disagreements, and we're not trying to get people to change their minds here or convert to the other party, but despite those disagreements, there is some common ground. And for our posterity and for our sake of our democracy, we need to find that common ground right now. The third principle is that we can create a space in our lives, in our society, beginning with us as individuals and the groups we're a part of, and ultimately with our government. We can create a kind of depolarized zone, okay, where the divisiveness and rancor is outside that zone. We're operating within that zone in this different kind of way that is not so polarized and filled with rancor. And that building that zone of depolarization is crucial for our country, and we need to do it right now.
So what we've created with Better Angels is a container, a set of processes that encourage people to listen deeply to the opinions and the values and experiences of people on the other side of the chasm. And I learned something about you, and you returned the favor to me. And the core 2 questions there are, what values and beliefs does your side have that you think are good for the country? Values, policies, and beliefs. Your side, good for the country. And then the second question, what reservations or concerns do you have about your own side?
Welcome back. We're talking with Better Angels about a movement to get people to talk with each other. I don't know if the right word is talk, dialogue, but to listen more than anything. I want to shift to the younger generation and kids, teens. Many schools and summer camps and just places where you have children doing activities ask them not to discuss politics in any way, shape, or form. And I'm perhaps it's because the adults don't know how to handle it themselves, or they don't know how to handle the children doing it. Mm-hmm. But do you see this as a problem, and how do we, if a problem, how do we fix it?
You know, Better Angels does see that at least as an issue that it's interested in pursuing and tackling. My hypothesis is that the schools want to avoid political discussion because the students come from homes with different points of view, and that's the baggage they're bringing in. But as a kind of a first attempt at this, I'm actually giving a presentation on Election Day to 340 middle school students about the elections, what's taken place in the last few weeks, and Better Angels.
And you might want to videotape it so people can watch it.
All right, I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but but in addition to that, there is an effort to get Better Angels workshops on college campuses. You know, young people generally form their points of view and attitudes that stay with them for many years, oftentimes during the high school and the college years. And so there is a great deal of interest in how do we get students, particularly at the college level, to listen and communicate more respectfully. In fact, there's a group from Better Angels that will be working with and speaking with a group from the Woodrow Wilson Graduate School at Princeton University, I believe on November 9th, I believe. So after the election, but talking about this very issue and how to get more activity on the college campuses.
Okay, we have a viewer question. Did you want to add something?
Yes, that I would even go so far as to say that there is interest on the part of high schools around our nation, that we hone a methodology that we can begin to embed some of the principles and the competencies learned through Better Angels workshops in the context of U.S. history, civic engagement, and embedded into the curriculum. Presently, I am in conversation with what are called the Red, Blue, and White Schools of Connecticut. Red, Blue, and White Schools of Connecticut, who have been flagged by the governor of Connecticut as flagship schools where civic engagement becomes front and center. So I think this becomes a nice avenue for Better Angels to penetrate and begin to have a real impact on education.
Okay, so it is something that is being considered.
Yeah.
We have a question from a viewer. I'm going to read it to you. Is the two-party system in place since America was founded going to survive?
My guess is the two-party system will survive or largely survive, and at the same time, it's probably a big part of the problem. I'm a business person by background, so I'm used to business strategy terms. In the world of politics, I would say there are huge barriers to entry. It's difficult to run for office without huge financial support from the party. And so it is a system that almost self-perpetuates itself, which is what makes the activities of Better Angels so much more important, because that system inherently, as the money has increased, has pushed people further and further apart. And somehow we need to get citizens to recognize where they have common ground and work together and convince the political class that they need to do the same thing.
So do you see things improving, worsening? Do you have hope, I guess is what I'm really asking you.
So everything that I have heard, either through Better Angels discussions as well as political analysis, is that things are going to get worse before they get better. We have not hit rock bottom. However, the Better Angels movement and other movements like it are running against the current, very clearly. I think that is quite obvious. But we are beginning to see this movement in spite of the current all across the country. From California, we have members in Alaska. We have members in Florida. We have members in Hawaii. So this is just very interesting that despite the current trend and the wave towards tribalism and echo chambers, there is really a thirst in the nation to mitigate the polarization, and that I don't think this movement is going to stop. I think it's going to continue to build momentum, and we will have the lift that we need because more and more people are in fact seeing the need for this. So,
any advice for those uncomfortable Thanksgiving tables?
Yes.
Yes. Actually, Better Angels, in addition to these Red Blue workshops we've discussed, actually conducts skills workshops as well. Those skills workshops are intended to teach or train people how to communicate in respectful ways, how to listen respectfully, how to have curiosity. There are ways to listen to make sure that the speaker knows they've been heard. There are ways to ask questions so that the person sees you have genuine curiosity, not gotcha questions, but questions to understand where that person is coming from. There's training in terms of when might those conversations be more effective? When perhaps should you avoid them? There are ways to express points of view that make it clear that it's a personal opinion, and even to share what is some background experience that leads you there, again, so that the communication becomes less of a battle, more of learning from one another, respecting one another. It takes role modelings.
Sounds like family therapy.
You know, the skills discipline for these workshops actually was developed by a marital therapist. And my wife, who has been a moderator both for skills workshop and a Red Blue workshop, is a therapist and does a lot of couples work.
Okay, there we are.
Not a surprise.
We are running out of time, but I want to give you the opportunity to tell people who might want to learn more about Better Angels or get involved with Better Angels, where they go and what they do.
Well, we have the website, which is www.better-angels.org. Please.
Don't forget the hyphen.
Yes, very important. There's a wealth of information. And actually, to Ken's previous point about how to have these conversations during the holidays, there's an entire scripted guidance around that.
Yes.
And all this is for public consumption at no cost. So please read up about us. Please take advantage of the materials. Use them to your advantage. And again, become a member. I do have to say that because it's just $10 for the year, and you are getting way more than $10 worth of value in terms of.
And I like the slogan you used on your flyer. Let's get America to relate again.
To relate again.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us, Sara and Ken.
Thank you.
And you, stay tuned. We'll be back with more of the Local Live in a moment.